Thanks for taking the time to play this presentation. I hope that it's helpful. I wanted to take some time and send out a presentation, probably two. I'll try to do one more next week, that gives some background as to what we're doing, just because there's so much involved with Passover that there's just really no way that we can go through everything in one night, without things just getting ridiculously long, which we don't want to do. So, um, in this presentation, I'm hoping to share some background and kind of set up for what we're doing on the 15th of April. So as far as Passover goes, it's a super old holiday, beginning, of course, instituted in the time of Moses by Jehovah. This has been celebrated continuously all the way up until now. If you were to go on to Google and Google what is the oldest holiday that is still celebrated today, it'll probably tell you New Year's. We're not going to give it credit though because it's inconsistently celebrated on different days, even among the same culture. Has changed through time and not always celebrated at all. So I think the real winner is actually Passover for the oldest holiday still being observed today, which is pretty cool that we can partake in such a rich tradition. As far as how I like to think about this and how I want to try to present this to everybody, I've kind of divided it into four categories. One is the origin of the holiday. We'll spend a lot of time on that one in this presentation here. A little bit of what has happened with the holiday over time, some of its major observances and its role in society throughout time, as well as the Passover at the time of Christ. Just have an interest in what are the things that Christ went through and how he observed them, and then a little of what happens after. I guess I became interested in all of this because I don't know, I've always complained that our holidays have become so pagan. On our calendar, we have a number of Christian holidays, everything from St. Valentine's Day to St. Patrick's Day to Easter to Halloween and Christmas, etc., etc. And all of them have the main tradition for the most part has been paganized. Even Easter is, for most of the United States, more about bunnies and eggs. And the name Easter, um, I won't go into that, but also it's not what the holiday's about, and it's kind of sad to me. And I was reading through the Old Testament and reading about these feasts and heard a little bit about them, and I had Jewish co-residents in residency, and all of that kind of struck up my interest a little bit in what are these holidays that Jehovah gave to Moses. There's 7 of them um, that were supposed to be celebrated. And based on that, I really didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't have a firm understanding of all of the holidays at all. Probably the one I'd heard the most about was Passover. Certainly hadn't heard of the other ones. Um, and and my family was willing. So last year we celebrated all 7 of those feasts that were given to Moses, and we also spent some time talking about and celebrating a little bit the other 3 feasts that came into existence after Moses, but Christ would have celebrated. Um, and I found it just very enriching and hopeful that by sharing a little bit of that with you, that you can find something that's helpful for you as well. I'm sure a lot of you may think of Passover as a meal or a feast, which it certainly is, but it's supposed to be so much more than that. There's a lot of education and even religious experience that really should be associated with Passover each time that it is observed. And it really is about the retelling of the Exodus and all of the different things that it symbolizes in our personal lives as far as pointing forward to Christ, etc. And so today I'm going to go through that story of the Exodus. I know a lot of you know it well. Hopefully I can point out a few things here that'll be interesting. I won't try to dwell on every detail so that this doesn't drone on too long. But we have to start with Abraham. And of course, Abraham is given this vision here that his posterity is going to be something like this. And I'm sure he couldn't have imagined before having that vision that that was possible for him. But by the end of his life, he has, these children down here. We're going to focus on the ones in bold here, the birthright that goes down to Isaac, then to Jacob, and we result in these 12 tribes here, these 12 brothers, and then the two sons of Joseph. By the time we get to Jacob here, his name, of course, is changed to Israel. He has these sons that I mentioned. It doesn't take long at that point for a family to just explode. I wish I had a picture of our family picture like the one that's in Grandma's house over the stairs there, but didn't have access to that. But you can imagine, especially with multiple wives, how many, how much posterity builds up very quickly with all of these children. If you go just by what's written down in the Bible and just the ones we know that were born to Jacob, there's about 70 people that end up going to Egypt to join Joseph after his affair in Egypt. So, of course, we recently studied how Joseph down here gets sold into Egypt and becomes Pharaoh's number two. And when they come to join him, there's at least 70 with their wives and children beside them. There's likely servants and others. So I am certain that we have over 200 people at least coming into Egypt to live. So there's a famine in the land of Canaan. Joseph is living probably somewhere over here. Rather than starve, Jacob sends his sons to go and get food from Egypt because he's heard there's food here. And lo and behold, when they come down, they encounter Joseph. And Joseph gets them what they need, but of course they end up settling in Egypt. Obviously, Pharaoh liked Joseph quite a bit and ends up giving them the land of Goshen, which is this area of land right here. At least that's the most popularly believed place for where they were given to live. And just for reference, the pyramids and things are over here. Pharaoh was likely in this region at that time, and the Israelites do quite well here with their families and multiply very quickly. Israelites are really good at doing that, and unfortunately, that becomes a problem for them here in the near future. Just a quick aside, this area here of Goshen, this is some of the architecture, some of the archaeology that's being performed here. Very interesting ruins. The architecture, there's a whole lot of commentary on that and the style of architecture. And anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. It's kind of cool what's being found. So the people do really well in Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and things are going very well until, unfortunately, the Pharaoh dies, the Pharaoh that Joseph knew so well. And the next Pharaoh doesn't have the same trust for Joseph and the Israelites. He's nervous about the numbers that are there. He's worried that the Israelites might join with some invading force and the two of them together be strong enough to overthrow the Egyptians. So in order to help prevent this, he appoints taskmasters over the Israelites, and it appears that without any battle or war being fought, the Israelites are now subjected to slavery. And this isn't just a short stint of slavery. This is 400 years that the Egyptians will use the Israelites to complete their burdens. And during this period of time, much of the knowledge of their religion and of their God is lost. Of course, much of the religion of the Egyptians creeps in. The Egyptians worship nature gods, a little different than the Greek or chief gods. The chief gods that you might see among the Greeks or the Romans. These nature gods would be things like for the sun and the moon and, the Nile River and different crops, etc. And so a fair amount of apostasy does set in over this time, as you can only imagine. Despite these 400 years of slavery, the Israelite population really does pretty well and really expands and grows through this. The Pharaoh that is in place 400 years later becomes worried that there are enough Israelites that they could cause an uprising all on their own and potentially overthrow their taskmasters. And so to manage this population, he issues a truly appalling edict. He orders that every male Israelite that is born from that time forward be thrown into the Nile River. Um, Not sure exactly how long this edict lasts, but this is the period and the context into which Moses comes. And so this story, of course, pictures Moses being put in a basket and floated down the river. So in a way, his mother did actually comply with the order, but in a way where she truly hoped she was going to save her son and still be able to raise him in Pharaoh's house where she was a servant. Um, Moses is saved here by Pharaoh's wife and is raised in Pharaoh's house. He knows Pharaoh, he knows Pharaoh's son, and they know him. And that really puts him in a prime position to do what he will be called to do here in the future. After the killing of an Egyptian who was being abusive to one of the slaves, he leaves and dwells as a shepherd. He was a shepherd for 40 years. So for the first 40 years of his life, he lives in the palace, in Pharaoh's house. And then for the next 40 years, he lives as a shepherd out caring for his flocks. Of course, this is very fitting for Moses, as he is a type of, or a figure, a prefigure for Christ. As a shepherd, one day he sees the bush, which is not consumed by the brilliant light or fire, and gets his call that he must go back and free his people. Obviously, the prospect of having to free his people is overwhelming to Moses, and it's a task he doesn't think he's up to. But the Lord assures Moses and gives him experiences to know that he, the Lord, will be the one that will actually get the people free, and that he will help him with this calling that he has been given. So Moses returns, and with his brother Aaron as a spokesman. There's some time with some staffs and snakes and the different magicians and things, but eventually we get to where Moses proclaims 10 different plagues upon the Egyptians. This happens one at a time. And each time that Moses declares a plague upon the Egyptians, if the Israelites are not let go, then after that plague is done, then he asks again for the people to be let go. Each time the Pharaoh has an opportunity to spare himself and his people any more plagues. Oftentimes we skip over these plagues pretty quickly, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time on them. A couple of them, as I was reading through this time, this first plague to me seemed a little more significant as I thought about what had just been happening in Egypt with throwing of the male babies into the Nile and how horrific that was, and how, to me, this seemed to show a little bit of the blood that was on the hands of the Egyptians in doing that. But I do think there's probably more to it than that. Some of the interpretation can be a little bit hard because the Hebrew here is ancient Hebrew in its root and can be hard to translate. So even we typically say lice instead of gnats, but we're not really sure which one. This one here for flies, the word that's written certainly implies that whatever animal it's speaking about imparts a pretty ferocious bite. So if they were flies, they were biting flies with a pretty mean bite. If you grew up in a Jewish family, you might, like this little craft kit on the 10 plagues that we're going to do here in a little bit, you would actually not say flies at all. You'd say wild animals. And that is what many rabbis believe that plague actually was. But regardless, certainly no fun for the Egyptians that had to live through them. Each of these plagues, I used to wonder why would they be selected, and I can't say that I really know for sure. But God does say that part of the reason for this was to show the Egyptians that he was God, and also as a judgment against their gods. And so I wanted to share a little bit of a presentation done. This one is done by a Protestant man. It's certainly not doctrinal or anything like that, but I do think it does a good job of kind of showing one way that these plagues could be interpreted and what they may have meant to the Egyptians at the time they came, because these plagues were certainly significant to the Egyptians. Um, so without further ado, we'll do that. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, follow the link down in the description or the email, and come back after you've watched that section. Whatever the reasons for the plagues, they were severe enough to not only deliver the Israelites, but to deliver them rich. When the Israelites went to the Egyptians and asked to borrow of their wealth, of their silver and gold, as they were asked to do by Moses, they evidently gave them abundantly. Evidently, these plagues were severe enough that they would do anything to get away from them. I wanted to play one more clip here from a YouTube video. This is a clip of Exodus, Gods and Kings by National Geographic. I like this one because it doesn't depict the plagues as some little fairy tale that's just kind of cute and funny, but as something that's a little more intense and severe, as I'm sure they were, at least to some degree. So this clip does rock a little bit, so if you've got speakers, go ahead and turn it up. Okay, one last time, go ahead and pause the video, follow the links to the other one, and return after you've watched it. And so, associated with that 10th plague, the Israelites kept the first Passover with all of the elements of the bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, the lamb, and the hyssop used to apply the blood to the doorposts, being ready with their shoes on their feet and their staffs in their hands. Just wanted to read a little bit from Exodus with some that talks about this first Passover and make a few comments as we go. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So it was in the evening that these sacrifices were to be killed. And they shall take of the blood, and strike it on the two side posts, and on the upper door post of the house wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden it all with water, but roast with fire his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. So unlike many meals that you may have prepared during that time period, this one was to be roasted over a fire. That wasn't especially common in that time, because when you roast something over a fire, all of the calories from all of the fat drips off into the fire and are lost. And if you're someone who's fighting for every calorie, that's not something you want to lose. Also, this animal was to be roasted whole. No broken bones, of course, and the roasting symbolizing that judgment has fallen upon whatever object you're speaking of. And it was to still have its head on and its legs. So it was very clear when this lamb was served up that this is a lamb, an animal that you are to eat. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. So after you're done eating, no leftovers. Not of the lamb anyway. It's got to be burned. It's only for this night. It's special in that way. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. So it says firstborn. It's a lengthy discussion, but firstborn here almost certainly means firstborn males. Although in Egypt it just says firstborn. It's agreed generally, not by everyone, but that this is probably referring to firstborn males of the Egyptians. Both man and beast. So firstborn animals were also killed in this Passover. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. We talked about that a little bit with one of our prior videos. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses wherein ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast, and it is supposed to be a feast, by an ordinance forever. One thing I wanted to mention, that it says that the beast died. We talked about symbolically what that might mean for some of the gods. I did want to mention that the Egyptians had at least 5 incarnate gods. One was, for instance, a bull, another one a sheep. These animals were considered to be like whichever god was of this bull. When that animal died, it would go into the next bull, and they would choose that out and they'd put it in a prominent place, perhaps in a religious place, and where the people could see it and care for it and offer their prayers to it. Also, Pharaoh himself was considered to be an incarnate version of the god Re. So in the morning, after all of these plagues and after this night where God had passed through the land of Egypt, they were to wake in the morning and literally see a judgment upon some of their gods, that they were dead. The living incarnate versions, including Pharaoh's son. So once again, just talking about our Passover sacrifice, it needs to be a firstborn male. We often forget that it could be a lamb or a goat, although it seems that with time, goats fell out of favors and lambs were preferred for the Passover sacrifice. And it was to be without defect, unblemished, no broken bones, no disabilities or defects. And these animals were taken into the homes on the 10th and then were killed on the 14th. So you literally lived with your Passover sacrifice for 4 days. And by that you could testify that it was unblemished, that it, and could establish some connection with it. Point out here that the scripture was specific enough to even mention that the blood was to be applied to the doorposts and the top of the door with hyssop. The English translation is hyssop. The old Hebrew word, we're actually not sure what plant this refers to. It may be this actual hyssop here growing in the land of Egypt. This is a little bit late spring. If we were to do this at Passover time, there probably wouldn't be flowers on it just yet, just the buds of those. However, many think that it wasn't. Hyssop is the incorrect translation, and it should be this plant here, which is related to oregano and has a definite oregano type fragrance to it, especially when it's wet. So by applying the blood to their doorposts, the Israelites did not have to suffer the loss of their firstborn or their firstborn males. They could be protected by the blood of the lamb. As I mentioned, the firstborn of beasts died as well. So their lamb or their goat was going to die that night anyway. The difference to the family inside was just whether or not they had decided to apply the blood to their doorposts. The people finish their Passover meal and early the next morning are free to go. They're finally able to leave. Somehow, unfortunately, Pharaoh again hardens his heart as the people are making their way off and sends his armies after them. But those armies are delayed and then destroyed definitively here in the Red Sea, possibly the Reed Sea. 1 year later, they celebrate their first Passover as a memorial to the year before. Then in Exodus, it records that the people were told that they would not celebrate Passover again until they entered the Promised Land. So they have a 39-year reprieve on the celebration of Passover. And then we can read about Joshua celebrating Passover as they do finally enter the Promised Land. Um, and it has been observed continuously ever since as a night of remembrance, just as it says in Exodus chapter 12. Um, a couple of large Passovers to mention would be Hezekiah, has a big one we can read about. Josiah, the people had apostatized, and he brings that back because it was no longer being observed as a community, at least in that time. And never was there a Passover like the one he threw up to that point in time. Unfortunately, not much later, the Babylonian captivity happens and the destruction of Solomon's temple. So there is no more sacrifice at that time. The Jews are taken in the diaspora or spread out in different countries. Passover was still observed sporadically and inconsistently, but without sacrifice at that time. I guess there was some sacrifice still happening on the Temple Mount. Some of the Samaritans and the Jews that were left over were doing some sacrifices where the altar was on the Temple Mount, but nothing official, nothing like what it was. And then, of course, under Nehemiah, Ezra gets the temple rebuilt and reinstitutes the Passover there. And then we have the Passover being celebrated the way that it was, with sacrifice as it was intended, all the way up through to Christ. And Joseph and Mary, it's mentioned in the Gospels, were faithful about traveling to the Passover every year. So Christ would have attended in Jerusalem every year as was supposed to happen. The Jews continued to celebrate Passover with sacrifice all the way up to 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. And the disciples of Christ, the 12 apostles and the early church, also continued to observe Passover, however, without sacrifice. Of course, Christ was the last sacrifice, and there's many scriptural passages in the New Testament which talk about them going to keep Passover, but also extra scriptural references to this as well. So the Exodus and the Passover are a metaphor for personal redemption from sin. I don't want to drone on too long about this. I've already gone on for a long time, but there are so many parallels throughout the Exodus story about how the Israelites are in bondage and slavery that they cannot free themselves from, and they needed miracles and the blood of the Lamb to get free from that. And so I encourage you, if you ever have time reading through the Exodus story, think about it kind of in that light. You can do whole Passovers where that's the only thing you focus on, is just how you can become free from your sin. So I just want to talk a little bit about the system of timekeeping and how things worked for the ancient Israelites as well as the modern Jews. The Jews used a lunar calendar that was corrected to a solar year. The moon cycle from new moon to the next new moon is 29.5 days. So that does require some corrections as you go through your year. But the moon and the moon cycle were very important, and they were very keyed into this. In fact, you read some of the writings by the Essenes and things, which is a sect of Jews that lived just outside of Jerusalem. They tried to be originalists. They were after Malachi that they came into existence. But they would write about how when you first went to the temple, you are a new moon. And that's because you're empty and you're just ready to be filled with light. The Hebrew language itself is written from right to left, and that is because the light fills the moon from right to left as it goes across. It goes from the right side to the left side. Just wanted to mention Matthew chapter 1 because I really feel like this is an obvious reference to the moon, as he mentions, 7, 7, 7, 14, 14, 14. These would clearly have indicated those numbers that, you're talking about the moon cycle and things here. And so in Matthew chapter 1, of course, he gives the genealogy of Christ and demonstrates that Christ comes through the right lineage, but also takes great length to declare, and even, he'll sum up afterwards, so from the time of Abraham, Israel's just getting started. It's ready to be filled with light. To David, at the time of David, Israel's at its most powerful. Um, Everything seems to be going well. And then from the time of David to the captivity, they've lost it all. They're in the captivity, are 14 generations. So 14 generations from Abraham to David, from David to the captivity, and then, so we're here at a new moon again, and then 14 generations from David to Christ, which brings us to a full moon. So Christ would be here at the time of a full moon. So how does that relate to Passover? Well, Passover is always on a full moon. The night that the early morning, I should say, that the Israelites left Egypt was a full moon. And we know this because Jehovah declared that the Passover, the time they left was to be their first month of the year. So what they call now Nisan would always be the first month of the year. And the 14th day of that month, so from here to here, is Passover. So Nisan always starts on a new moon because all the months start on a new moon. And then from there to your Passover always puts you on a full moon. So this is still a little hard for me to keep straight when I'm trying to celebrate these old feasts, but for the Israelites anciently as well as Jews still to this day, a new day starts with sunset and then goes all the way up until the next sunset. So as you go through the year, the time a new day starts will change. And the rationale for this is really straight from the creation story. As you can see here, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So it starts with the evening and the morning, and then each day, evening and morning, evening and morning. So because of that, that's the rationale for calling them that way. So the Passover meal would have started just after sunset. There is debate to this day that rages on about whether that's just sunset in Jerusalem or whether that's sunset wherever you are, which is how most people view it. And also, is it just sunset or is it when the first 3 stars are visible for that night? It doesn't really matter for us, but that's how they kept track of time. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about how the year was laid out. So it starts with Nisan and goes around like this. Of course, this is on the lunar year, so there's 354 days in the year. This does mean that in order for your holidays, like you have Passover here in the spring, in order for your holidays not to migrate and eventually be in the fall or whatever, you do need to correct this. So we currently correct this using the Pharisaical system, at least as it existed in the medieval times. And so 7 out of every 19 years, we add a 13th month. You get like another month of Adar in there. And that keeps all the holidays where they're supposed to be, except for that one. That one's blasphemy. Ignore that holiday. This keeps the lunar year solar corrected, unlike, for instance, Muslims use a lunar calendar, but it's not corrected to a solar year. And so you'll see Ramadan kind of migrating through seasons. It's always at a different time of the year, and that's why. But this is also why Passover, it's on the lunar calendar, and that's why it's a different day every year. And it also can vary a little bit based on this extra month and this correction factor that needs to be plugged in. Whether or not this is how they did it during Christ's time, I cannot say for sure. I tend to think that this is a Pharisaical system of correction, like I mentioned, and I tend to think that they probably followed a Sadduceical one, since the Sadducees were in charge of the Sanhedrin, etc., throughout that time period, and it seems to me on other different time system things that the Sadducees have it more straight than the Pharisees do. But we can save that debate for another time. Thank you for sticking with me. For those who stuck with me this far, I hope that some of this information is enriching and can help you get more out of Passover for when we have it. I'll try to get one more video out for to be watched, hopefully on Palm Sunday. That'll give even more details on all of that, and then we'll have plenty to go through still on Passover. And thanks for your time. I appreciate it.